Yeah, so I'm from Massachusetts. I went to Boston University, a little town, Grantham, Massachusetts, is where I grew up. I went to Boston University and was involved in the ROTC and got a regular Army commission from the ROTC there and joined the Army in July of '55. Did my basic training at basic officers training at Fort Benning. Went on to airborne training and then was assigned to Europe, Germany, to the 2nd Armored Division in Worms, Germany, a battalion there. And after I'd been there about 6 months, spent most of the time in the field, of course, in maneuvers, there was a requirement from West Berlin for some 4 junior officers. And they chose 3 from my battalion, and we all ended up in West Berlin with the 6th Infantry Regiment. I was in the 2nd Battalion, 6th Infantry Regiment, and I was a 2nd lieutenant at the time, promoted to 1st lieutenant, I guess, while I was there. And our job was to, you know, if something happened, if the balloon went up, as they say, was to protect a portion of Berlin as much best we could, but of course the Russians were all around, and at that time the wall hadn't gone up yet. So I remember taking tours over in East Berlin, and I remember going to the opera in East Berlin. We'd get dressed up in our dress blues, and another officer and I, and walk across to the opera. Yeah.
Did anybody, was there, I mean, just walking across, was it that easy, or did they check your...
Well, yeah, they would examine, you know, your ID card, but there was no wall or fence or anything.
No checkpoint Charlie? Or
no, nothing like that. No, it hadn't been put up yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
but the line was defined pretty much, I can't remember exactly how, but there was no wall per se. And it was during my time as a lieutenant in Berlin that I was selected to be a commander of the guard at Spandau. And as you know, at that time, Spandau Prison, which was a Victorian era brick structure, very forbidding, very depressing, with the towers and the gate and all of that. It housed a number of the prisoners from Nuremberg. I recall seeing Albert Speer, Walter Funk, von Schirach, oh, and Hess, yes, right. I remember seeing the 4 of them. Yeah. Now what that involved was, each of the 4 occupying powers rotated the prison guard. We followed the Russians. So it was the Russians, the Americans, the British, and the French. We each had a month of guard, and it was the exterior guard. The interior guard actually were the wardens who handled the prisoners, and they had their own staff. We didn't handle the prisoners. We essentially manned the guard towers and did a roving patrol. And our job was not only, was really not so much to keep the prisoners in, but to keep others out if there was any sort of effort to break them out. I never thought that was much of a possibility, but it was a fear that they had, and so that was what we were instructed to do. Interesting, when we replaced the Russians, before we replaced them at Spandau, we were invited to a party, and the Russians hosted the party. And my battalion commander was with me, because I was a lieutenant, maybe 23 at the time, and you know, I wasn't familiar with those kinds of social activities. My battalion commander said to me, "Hank, just get ready to drink a lot of alcohol, and on the way out, if you need to lean on me, that'll be okay." Well, at any rate, we went in, and as I recall, there was a reception area, and there the Russians served cognac and maybe some hors d'oeuvre of some kind. And then we toasted the President of the United States, the Prime Minister, or whatever the Russian leader was called at that time.
This would have been Khrushchev, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would have been Khrushchev, yeah. And other dignitaries, so that I must have had at least 3 shots of vodka, you know, just like this, down the hatch. before we went into dinner. And the dinner, it was at noontime, was chicken and wine, Russian wine, and vegetables. And we started the dinner again with a toast. And then after dinner, we went back to the little reception room where we had vodka, cognac, and proceeded to toast again. So after that, I held my own, but, and I didn't have to lean on my battalion commander, but I got out of there with my dignity, I guess. But he said, you just need to go home, and I did, slept it off. But it was very interesting, because that was the first time I'd interacted with the Soviets, and their guard platoon was there, their warders were there, and I guess we had a couple of translators. Following that, I guess a week or so later, we actually had the changeover ceremony. And the Russian platoon was lined up inside, platoon formation of 3 squads, with the officer of the guard in front, probably a captain. And I marched my platoon in through the gates you saw in the picture that I gave you. And I was on the right. We exchanged salutes. We marched to the first guard tower, and I took my soldier and the Russian officer, and we climbed up into the guard tower and posted my guard. And then he took his guard, went down, and we proceeded around the installation.
How long would the guard duty be? I mean,
2 hours.
2 hours?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. 2 hours off, 2 hours on, and then relief. Yeah.
Did anybody sit down and give you a briefing as to who the 4 prisoners were and a little bit of their background? Right.
The American warden did that. We got a very thorough briefing as to who was there and the problems the guards would face, and the fact that it wasn't so much an interior guard to keep the prisoners from escaping, but rather watching the exterior of the prison for any possible activity.
Was there any intelligence that you got, or anybody got, thinking that there was somebody out there that was a group?
No, never. Yeah. No, I don't. My personal belief was there never really was a threat, but there must have been something. Yeah. It could be that the most hostility towards the prisoners, from what I understood, was from the Russians. So whether they would try to do anything or not, I don't know. The other thing I remember clearly is seeing the prisoners themselves. In the colder month, whatever month that was, they would walk around the prison yard, and they had their paths worn in the soil. So, and in the summer months, maybe fall, because it seemed to me their gardens were well along, they were able to have their own little plots of vegetables and things. Whether they all did that or not, I don't know, but I remember seeing 1 or 2 of them out there working. I think I could identify Albert Speer because he was the tallest one. Hess was thin, but I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between von Schirath and Funk, I don't think. Yeah. But at one time they were all out there, so I've seen them all. Yeah.
Were they doing exercise, or was it just a walking?
Walking. Yeah. I never saw any organized exercise outside. Yeah. I just saw them working in their garden and walking their paths. My general impression of the place was it was very bleak. The exterior not very well cared for. I mean, the lawns weren't mowed, or it was pretty bare bones. I knew about Nuremberg. I knew about the trials. And we've been given a good briefing, so I knew it was an important duty. And but I never felt that I was a player in history particularly.
On August 17, 1987. But even his death is fraught with inconsistency. The official version is that he commits suicide by hanging himself. But some historians claim he is murdered. Autopsy reports state that marks on his neck indicate that he was strangled.